Alright, so I am just trying to figure out basically what pieces I'm going to sew together first. I think I'm going to do the center back seam, and then I think I'm going to sew this side and this side, and then I will sew this up as well, just because I think it would be kind of miserable to do it any other way. Once that's done, I'm gonna worry about straps, and I'm gonna worry about finishing the edges, and particularly these edges. That's the plan of action. I'm a force of chaos when I sew, so I kind of just want to go for it and then unpick seams if I don't totally love the way they turned out. I followed my plan for which pieces I wanted to assemble in what order, pretty much exactly, starting with the center back seam, and then attaching those two center back pieces, and then joining up the middle. After a lot of procrastination, I finally got around to assembling the shoulder straps. I pinned them together, sewed them together, and then turned them right side out. This was by far the most difficult part of making the straps, just in terms of the sheer amount of struggling I did. Then I sewed the shoulder straps in place. I have sewn the straps in and then decided to figure out, hey, wait a second, how are the seams finished? So I went back to the original garment. I found some much higher resolution photos from the website of the Musée Arletin, which are super helpful, and I wish I'd had them in the beginning. When I was planning, I had much lower quality images from a different French museum catalog website, but I have them now, so that's really useful. And I'm still trying to figure out basically what is going on the original garment. I think what they did is clearly there is a seam that runs right here. It isn't just the top fabric folding over and then being felled down. There's definitely a seam in the original, but then on the other side, right on the lining side, there's this little strip, so it looks like it's been, bound with some kind of tape, but the tape does not extend it, so it's like sewn in this sort of seam and then folded over and then sewn again. So that maybe is what's going on, and I don't want to do that. So I've decided instead to basically do the same method as I did with the straps, which is turn it to the wrong side and pin the seam together like this, and then I can just pop this over and voila. So it looks really nice when it's like finished like that, but then of course there's the question of, well, what do I do about these? And I have no answer to that yet. I've already sewn them in and I got the position correct. It took a lot of fiddling, so I'm kind of inclined to just leave them, and then I will sew them down like this and really just obviously fold over the edges and just really reinforce this joint, because this is going to be taking a lot of pressure and I just want the seams to hold up. I flipped the body panels inside out and pinned them together in order to create that top edge, and then sewed them together. To finish the straps, I trimmed the seam allowance and then folded the top fabric over, felling it down by hand. This is before I realized that you didn't actually have to tie knots and you could just do a backstitch and bury the thread. I finished the rest of the raw edges in much the same manner, just trimming the seam allowance, folding the top fabric over, in this case the fashion fabric, much like in the original, and then felling it down by hand. I have finished the interior seams and attaching the straps, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. The linen that I used, this blue linen that I used, is not the hardiest of materials, so it's not maybe gonna hold up that great in the long run on these sort of like really intense seams, but for a garment that's going to get occasional use and light washing, I think it'll be fine. Next up, I have to finish the center front eyelets and lacing and the hem, and then we're finished. To finish the front edges, I once again trimmed down the lining and batting fabric, and then folded the fashion fabric over to create a secure and fray-proof edge for the front of the corset. I sewed these edges down by hand as well, and then I finished the bottom edge by folding the selvage up and over to conceal just that little fluffy bit. I really liked that rainbow of threads running through the selvage, and I wanted to preserve it. To mark the holes where the eyelets were supposed to go, I very daringly used ruler and a Sharpie, which I'm not sure I would do again, but the holes did turn out pretty much correctly. I offset them slightly to achieve the spiral effect, and then used an awl and pushed through the layers of fabric. Once the holes were made, it was time for me to sew up the eyelets. I used embroidery floss in a matching color to whip stitch the holes, reopening them with my awl if they started to close up while sewing. I tried not to over-engineer them, as eyelets I've seen on other 18th century stays or jumps tended to be fairly expedient. It's always nice to know that my chaotic, haphazard, and often impatient methods of finishing and constructing garments are actually historically appropriate, which makes me feel not quite so bad about not doing things perfectly all the time. Then came quilting, which was by far the most difficult and the most time-consuming part of this project. I say most difficult because it was incredibly wearing on the hands to push a needle through that many layers of fabric enough times to cover the entire corset with quilting. I decided to have the lines going in opposite directions to start with. My intention was to do that diamond or diaper pattern with the quilting, which the original has. However, by the time I actually got all the way done with one sort of direction of quilting, I decided to just call it a day. It was serving its purpose, and my hands were far too sore and tired to continue. I did, however, use the diamond pattern on the straps just for a little bit of visual contrast, and I think the effect was quite nice. These are my final stitches on the corset, and by this point I was very, very happy to be done. And there's a little close-up of the diamond pattern quilted onto the straps. I had laced it previously, but the length of cord that I used was just too short, so I decided to cut a longer length of cord and then relace them just so I could demonstrate how to spiral lace. I used a tapestry needle to draw the cord through the eyelets. I reinforced the lacing at the top and the bottom by wrapping the cord through the eyelets twice. I learned this method from Redthreaded. They have a video on how to spiral lace a pair of stays, which I will link down below. I followed my plan for which pieces I wanted to assemble in what order, pretty much exactly, starting with the center back seam. So here is the finished corset. I am incredibly pleased with how it turned out. I think the quilting being just sort of unidirectional and then meeting at the back is really, really pretty. I like the spiral lacing actually, and it's been such a pleasure to like wear this out in public with, for instance, a pair of jeans or like a high-waisted skirt, and just kind of see what people's reactions are. There are no reactions. It's great. It just passes totally incognito because it's like a cute little summer top. It also happens to be an 18th century corset, which I can wear under other late 18th century clothes as I make them. The quilting definitely lends a sort of stability to it, which is great. It makes it pretty supportive and also really comfortable because it is so flexible and soft. I'm really proud of myself for actually completing this project. I didn't know if I was gonna make it all the way through, but I did.